So in today's video I will be explaining every character released in Genshin Impact so far and then rating them. Keep in mind that the explaining and rating will be based on their kit and gameplay, so if you came here because of the lore or anything like that, then I am sorry, but you came to the wrong place. Either way, let me explain the tiers of the rating now. So we are going to start from the bottom at the F tier, which stands for stinker characters. So those are obviously the characters that are just the worst in the game and do not really fit into any decent teams, so they should be immediately replaced unless you like them or somehow enjoy their playstyle. Moving on to D tier, which are the characters that are still bad but can be viable, but generally you would want to go for a better unit since they require too much investment or simply aren't as good as they used to be at least. Now C tier has some decent characters that are of course better than F or D tier characters, at least in a way that they can easily replace them, but are also pretty mid as they can also be easily replaced by better ones and generally do require some high investment as well. Now finally off to B tier, which actually has some good characters, however these characters can be only that good if highly invested, so if you aren't willing to invest in those characters then it's better off leaving them since they will obviously suck. A tier characters are amazing and in some situations they can possibly be even meta, however they don't require that much investment as B tier units or any other ones to be that good, but they still need some investment to be viable, and even after those ones you can still find even better characters. S tier characters are simply broken characters that are also meta if not having that one limited 5-star SS tier banner character and actually don't require much investment to be crazy good, though still not completely the best in the game since SS tier characters are the best possible characters in the game that you can possibly own, and I have nothing much to say about those in other than they are completely broken meta units which will get you through all of the hard content of the game, possibly even if they have barely investment in them. I am gonna be starting off with all of the current 5 elemental travelers and then moving on to all of the other characters that of course are currently playable. Now Anemo Traveler's skill is meant for charging and regenerating energy, and what it basically does is just pushes enemies back for a little bit while the burst, which costs 60 energy, makes him or her create a tornado that lasts for 6 seconds, pushing enemies back until it ends, so that can be pretty annoying, as you cannot really properly damage your enemies with any of the melee attacks. However, you can use Bennett with the Anemo Traveler together, which will create what I like to call a pyro tornado, causing swirl reactions to all the current enemies that will be suffering inside the tornado. Now the Geo Traveler, by using the skill, you can place a Geo construct by either tapping it or by holding. It lets you decide on where to place it. This Geo construct is meant for either blocking, attack, or for climbing, which is good for exploration whenever there is one of those elemental things for statues of the 7 in the air too high, but not good in battles at all. This Geo construct explodes after 30 seconds. Travelever's burst on the other hand makes her or him release this kind of shockwave where it places walls around you, which can be used to block attacks. However, it's much more useful at C1 because it increases all party members' crit rate by 10% overall. I mostly recommend you to use the Geo Traveler for exploration, as he or she does a better job there than in battles, and as for critical rate buff, well, it's not that worth it. As with good crit rate builds, you can do the job without the Geo Traveler anyway, or just use other crit rate buffers who are better, like Rosaria. Next up is Electro Traveler. Using the skill, he or she hits an opponent with Electro, and then this Electro shock transforms into those crystals that you can pick up, which will recharge your energy. Each time it drops 2 of those and each one gives you 3 per crystal, which brings us in total to 6. Also it has a cooldown of 13.5 seconds, however thanks to the passive talent, if obtained by another party member, the cooldown will be decreased by 1.5 seconds. Now the burst, which has 80 energy cost and lasts for 12 seconds, it creates this thunder effect that follows your active character around, even when the Electro Traveler is off field, and deals electro damage whenever any of the characters attack, while also regenerating almost 1 energy. Overall, there are better Electro characters out there. However, if you don't have any better ones yet and are using energy hungry characters, then Electro Traveler is just a fine choice. Now next up is the Dendro Traveler, which is definitely the best out of all of the travelers so far. The skill basically shoots leaves, which can just be used for energy recharging, but it also has an 8-second cooldown, while the burst creates this nice Dendro field, which is amazing for Dendro reactions, though the main problem is that it has 80 energy cost, but it also has a 12-second duration, so the burst is definitely just a better version of Collie's burst. In the end, Dendro Traveler is very good and fits great in Dendro teams, and is in my opinion the only element on Traveler that is really really worth investing in. Finally, last but not least, we have the Hydro Traveler. Basically you can hold the skill and it will start shooting water and at some point automatically end, not to mention that the burst has 80 energy cost, and even the burst that lasts only for 4 seconds with 20-second cooldown isn't good at all. What it does is that it creates this giant bubble that just like slowly passes through the enemies for the next 4 seconds, dealing some hydro damage and then vanishes. Anyway, as you just saw, Hydro Traveler does seem kinda fun to use, but at the same time Hydro Traveler is literally poop and in my opinion the worst traveler yet. Even when you are shooting at the enemies, the shooting range has its limit, and to not make it even worse, when you are in the shooting mode, enemies can get closer to you of course, dealing damage to you and even possibly taking you down by the time you stop shooting. So I really hope that in the future, Pyro and Cryo won't be as near as bad as the Hydro Traveler is. Aloy is a 5-star Cryo bow user. Aloy is from Horizon Zero Dawn and became part of Genshin Impact community ever since MiHoYo collabed with Guerrilla Games back in 2021 around September, and she could only be obtained back then if you were adventure rank 20 or higher, yet only once, meaning that it's impossible to get her constellations if you manage to get her by using her skill. She throws the bomb that goes into pieces and one of those pieces will explode when the enemy walks on the bomb, and once 4 enemies walk into those bomb pieces, Aloy's damage gets converted into cryo, which lasts for 10 seconds, though her burst does deal a fine damage and it only costs 40 energy, and she fires it pretty quickly in her straight direction as well. So Aloy is one of the weakest characters in entire Genshin Impact game, and honestly I don't see her fitting into any decent teams, at least until we don't get constellations for her, which could make her better, yet I don't think it's gonna happen, since Aloy was like a one-time opportunity thing. Amber is a 4-star Pyro bow user. Now Amber, when you use that skill button, drops her Baron Bunny that literally takes like 8 seconds to explode just to barely deal any damage, though her burst is better since it makes her create a field of firing arrows that does deal slightly more damage than skill, but it's already all gone in 3 seconds. Overall, Amber is in my opinion the worst character in the game. I mean, I know that unlike Aloy she has constellations, but seeing just how bad not only her burst is but mostly her skill, even if she is better with constellations, I still don't think that she's worth using. In the end, she's a starter character who is only there to show you how to play the game, but then eventually gets permanently replaced, unless if you like her and still want to use her. I mean, you can do that, but she will lack a lot, not bringing good value to the team at all. Kaeya is a 4-star cryo sword user. His skill just makes him create a quick freeze from his sword, dealing good cryo damage but mainly used for energy recharging. His skill also works great for ice bridging. He was also the first ever ice bridger, making him the original legendary creator of ice bridging, though he does it a bit slow but it still decently works. In the meantime, Kaeya's burst is really familiar to Xiangling's burst that just circles around the active character, applying cryo damage, which is also super easy to get since it only costs 60 energy and lasts for 8 seconds, though to keep in mind that his burst is not that big, at least compared to Xiangling. So if you are looking for a character that can deal damage from long range, unfortunately Kaeya isn't your best option. Now as for his constellations, they are way too hard to get since they can be obtained only from standard banner. Same goes for Amber and Lisa, who are also another 2 starter characters like Kaeya. However, Kaeya's constellations are an important part of his kit. His C2 increases his burst duration up to 15 seconds, while his C6 will add another icicle in his burst which will make him even stronger. Either way, Kaeya can fit in a lot of cryo teams, and he especially works great with characters such as Hu Tao, Xiangling, Xingqiu and even his buddy Diluc. Lisa is a 4-star electro catalyst. Her skill just deals an electro damage to nearby opponents and is mainly focused on energy recharging, though unfortunately best way to obtain energy particles is by holding her skill, which takes like 3 seconds to accomplish, and by that time she can even get interrupted by the enemy. And when you use her burst, she places an electro field which is great for electro reactions and lasts for 15 seconds. However, it has 80 energy cost. Overall, Lisa definitely works best at Dendro teams. However, despite her dealing good electro damage, she can still be replaced with better electro characters such as Kuki or Fischl, who perform better and definitely don't require heavy investment on their burst like Lisa does. Venti, aka the Anemo Archon, is a 5-star Anemo bow user. When you use Venti's skill, he creates a wind. This wind is fantastic for exploring, yet good for plunge attacks as well. But when he comes to smaller enemies, Venti is completely broken because his burst pulls them in his strong wind that he creates, which lasts for 8 seconds, and during that time you can create swirl reactions. However, his burst cannot pull any of the bigger enemies in it, but it can still work for creating swirl reactions if his burst has been placed nearby large enemies. Venti is pretty nice character to have and fun to use. He can fit in lots of teams, especially if you don't have Kazuha, then Venti is a great choice to use. Jean is a 5-star Anemo sword user. First off, by holding her skill, Jean launches enemies in the air, dealing full damage afterwards. However, I recommend you to keep pressing it to regenerate energy faster, but by pressing her burst, Jean will create an Anemo field, instantly regenerating party members' health by a lot and then healing the character inside her Anemo field. Her burst lasts for about 10 seconds and costs 80 energy. While in her field, you can also create swirl reactions, such as by using Bennett's burst, since it will create a pyro swirl reaction. Now Jean is one of the best healers that works well with Furina, so if you don't feel like pulling for Kokomi, Baiju or Cloud Retainer but have Jean on your account, then build her and then use her in Furina teams if you haven't yet. Diluc is a 5-star Pyro Claymore user. His skill just makes him do a quick pyro damage, which is mainly used for energy recharging. His burst costs only 40 energy, and once you use his burst, Diluc creates a phoenix that passes through the enemies from Diluc's straight direction from where the burst was used, dealing pyro damage to all enemies it hits. From creating the phoenix, Diluc also infuses his claymore into pyro, which allows him to constantly deal pyro damage for the next 8 seconds now at the game's release. Diluc used to be one of the best characters in the game, but as more better characters kept coming to the game like Hu Tao, he just kinda fell down until the Cloud Retainer got released. Because of Xiangling, he can now deal amazing damage, but to be honest, even with her release, you can still find better main DPS characters that don't specifically need Xiangling and can generally just deal high damage like him but without Cloud Retainer. So in reality, Diluc has changed during 4.4, but by not that much, but can still use him if you have Xiangling and if you like him, of course. Klee is a 5-star pyro explosive catalyst. Now Klee is just an explosive character, which all she really does is exploding everything on her way. Her skill is about creating mines and then exploding. Her burst also deals AoE pyro damage. With all the pyro explosions she does, she applies too much pyro, making it harder to create other reactions such as vaporizing. Klee also has one of the shortest ranges among all catalyst characters, making her even harder to use, not to mention slow attacks and long animations as well, making her clunky to play and just difficult to deal with. Now do not pull for Klee unless you really like this character and want to use her badly. In reality, there are many better main DPS characters out there. I mean, I know that Furina and Xiangling made her better and more useful, but when you think about it, you can realize that they are very strong support units who made tons of characters better. So generally, if you're a meta player, you might want to go for better characters. Unless you pull for characters you like, which is fine, but you could eventually get bored of playing with her because her kit is just all about exploding. Noelle is a 4-star Geo Claymore user. Her skill makes her create a strong shield, though it only lasts for 12 seconds while it's on cooldown for 24 seconds. But the shield has some chances of regenerating party members' health. However, C1 Noelle has 100% chance of healing if both her skill and burst are active at the same time. Now as for her burst, Noelle basically like upgrades her claymore in a way that it's way larger and deals geo damage, and her burst costs 60 energy while lasting for 15 seconds. Overall, Noelle is a great shielder for the start. However, due to her long cooldowns, Noelle kinda gets worse and worse when enemies becoming more challenging and difficult to deal with. Not to mention that she can easily be replaced with Zhongli or other shield characters that don't have such long cooldowns like Noelle. Barbara is a 4-star Hydro Catalyst. Now Barbara is a healer that mostly just heals, at least when you use her skill or burst. However, she is a viable option for Dendro teams since she is a Hydro applicator but can easily be replaced with better Hydro units. Not to mention that her burst only heals and doesn't apply any Hydro to the enemies. In the end, Barbara is a great healer for the start. She carried me when I was a beginner. However, she is not that useful anymore when you start facing harder and more challenging enemies. Rosaria is a 4-star Polearm user. Rosaria's skill makes her dash behind the targeted enemy, which will deal cryo damage, which is mostly recommended to use for regenerating energy, but it also increases her crit rate by 12%. And by using Rosaria's burst, she will create a cryo field that will deal cryo damage to nearby opponents multiple times. This effect lasts for 8 seconds and it requires 60 energy cost. Another thing is that it increases crit rate of nearby party members based on Rosaria's crit rate by 15%. When Rosaria is at C2, her burst extends for 4 seconds, making her burst deal even more cryo off-field. Overall, Rosaria is a nice cryo sub-DPS character to have. Deals nice damage and is not a bad crit rate buffer. She is mainly good for cryo melt teams. Albedo is a 5-star Geo sword user. By using Albedo's skill, he will create a field that will deal Geo damage whenever the enemy inside the field is attacked every 2 seconds, which every one of those fields last for 30 seconds and a new one can be placed every 4 seconds. As for when you activate Albedo's burst, he will pretty much just deal more damage, especially if you are inside the field. But most importantly, his burst will increase party members' elemental mastery for 125, and the best part is that it only has 40 energy cost. Now if I am gonna be completely honest, Albedo can fit into pretty much any team you want. However, you should think wisely about pulling for him, as he is good but also situational, and it depends on what kind of characters you use. Not to mention can be replaced with another elemental mastery buffer like Sucrose, even if Albedo gives high elemental mastery increasement. Eula is a 5-star Cryo Claymore user. By tapping her skill, she will deal quick cryo damage while also gaining a stack, and Eula can obtain maximum of 2 stacks. With more stacks you can reach, Eula will consume her stacks and deal good damage while also decreasing enemies' physical and cryo resistance. Also, if Eula consumes maximum amount of stacks, then a Lightfall sword will be created that will instantly explode, dealing extra damage. But while Eula has those stacks, Eula's resistance to interruption is increased now when you use Eula's burst. She will create this Lightfall sword that follows her around, dealing lots of physical damage and also increasing Eula's resistance to interruption. Her burst can stack a maximum of 30 stacks while lasting for 7 seconds and costing 80 energy. Although her burst may have an high energy cost, the amount of damage that Lightfall sword deals upon exploding with such huge amount of stacks is just amazing. Though there are still better main DPS options anyway, but you can still pull for Eula if you love to use characters that deal physical damage, or just simply if you like Eula, then she is completely fine choice anyway. She works best with characters that give her super conduct and energy recharge, so you can create that type of team around her. Zhongli aka the Geo Archon is a 5-star Geo spear user. When you press his skill, he creates this pillar construct that is meant for blocking. However, you should always hold his skill in order to get the strongest shield in the game. Now his burst is not that important as his shield, however it still has its unique use, and that is that it petrifies the enemies, so it's like freeze but better since it can also stop cryo enemies from moving. Now the main problem about Zhongli is that he is situational, as he is the best shielder in the game and basically nothing else. So he really takes space in the party setup if the shield is not needed and could be replaced with someone else that deals damage. Though in reality Zhongli in the end fits literally into any team no matter what, so if you need a shielder and have Zhongli, use this guy. Tartaglia is a 5-star Hydro Bow user. Now the important thing about Tartaglia is that when you use his skill he switches to a Hydro melee weapon, which means that with this guy you can actually switch weapons between bow and a melee weapon. Tartaglia also has this useful mechanic by the name of Riptide, which makes him deal crazy amounts of Hydro damage and even AoE Hydro damage on melee range. However, the longer you are in melee range attack, the worse, as then the melee skill cooldown works in a way that longer you stay in melee range, the longer will be the cooldown for a melee range, so it's recommended to keep up with the time and switch back to bow once you are done using it. However, if you never switch to bow, well, it will automatically switch back to bow after 30 seconds anyway, and the cooldown of melee weapon will be 45 seconds. Now as for his burst, which has 60 energy cost, and when you use it in melee range, Tartaglia deals massive damage in very large AoE, which is better when he is in his bow mode. However, when you use his burst in bow mode, he deals AoE Hydro damage while also having return of 20 energy cost. Overall, Tartaglia is a very strong Hydro unit, though he doesn't work the best in Dendro teams as he is pretty difficult to use there, though he is still viable, but better Hydro characters exist for Dendro teams. However, he is very strong unit in vaporized teams or even electro charged teams, and also a pretty fun and satisfying main DPS to use. Xiao is a 5-star Anemo Polearm user. His skill just makes him do a quick dash and will deal Anemo damage to enemies in his path. It's basically just used for energy recharging. As for his burst that costs 70 energy, Xiao goes into that Yaksha plunging mode where all of his damage is converted into Anemo and he is able to deal lots of plunging area damage. This effect lasts for 15 seconds, so Xiao is a high damage dealer, especially the fact that he deals good plunging area damage. However, mostly recommended to pull for if you need an Anemo hypercarry. But he is really fun to play and useful for exploration because of his mid-air dash ability. Ganyu is a 5-star cryo bow user. Ganyu's skill plants this cryo flower that will distract the enemies, and then when pressed or when its duration is over it explodes, dealing cryo damage to nearby opponents. Now Ganyu's burst creates a large cryo field that will deal damage to opponents by falling icicles, which can be good for reactions such as melt, and it has 60 energy cost while lasting for 15 seconds. Also, as long as active members who are cryo are in the field, their damage will be buffed by 20%. So Ganyu can be used as a sub-DPS or cryo support in teams. However, she can also be a main DPS as she can deal really powerful AoE cryo charge damage shots. Hu Tao is a 5-star pyro spear user. Her skill is a main part of her kit and it converts her damage into pyro, increasing her damage by a lot, especially if she is lower than 50% on health and after it ends. It increases party members' crit rate for some time, and since she is one of those types that needs to stay on lower health, she can fall in team more easily than other party members. She is also a bit annoying to play until you get her to C1 as her charged attacks of course consume stamina, and her charged attacks are very important to her as they deal quite a good amount of damage. As well, while in her burst she pops off her friend Ghost that deals nice damage and heals Hu Tao. Overall, Hu Tao is an amazing main DPS. I don't believe that she is as good as Alhaitham or Neuvillette, but she gets the job done, so if you need a pyro carry then Hu Tao is the perfect character to go for. Xiangling is 4-star pyro spear user. Her skill will make Xiangling plant Goba, which is her teddy bear pet, and what will it do is just fire into nearby opponents, and once its duration expires, Goba will drop that chili pepper that if you pick up it will increase party members' attack for 10%. However, I do got to point out that her burst has high energy cost of 80 and Goba is not always that accurate. So if I compare her to Kaeya on how easy it is to get to their burst, well, Kaeya is way easier not only because he is cheaper, but his skill is more accurate than Xiangling's skill, as Goba can be pretty inaccurate to be honest, but when you get to her burst, it's all worth it. It's basically just a pyro version of Kaeya's burst that spreads and deals way more damage than Kaeya's burst. So because of Xiangling's amazing burst, she is always a fantastic pyro carry that deals good damage and is godly for pyro reactions, making her definitely 100% the best free character in the game. In fact, she should not be free, like they should make her harder to get, because she is actually one of the best characters in the game. Xingqiu is a 4-star hydro sword user. His skill makes create multiple swords around which reduce the taken damage and increase the character's resistance to interruption. Every hit, one of these will shatter healing a bit. Now just like with Xiangling, his burst is broken. It also costs 80 energy, but because his skill is not inaccurate, I would say still slightly easier to get to his burst than Xiangling's burst, and once you activate Xingqiu's burst, he creates firing rain swords that deal crazy damage and are fantastic for vaporizing and dendro reactions. Overall, Xingqiu is one of the best, if not the best 4-star in the game. Like, the damage on those rain swords is literally broken, and he works with anyone who needs hydro application, like Hu Tao for example. Xingqiu works amazing with Hu Tao for vaporizing reactions. Chongyun is a 4-star cryo claymore user. By using Chongyun's skill, he creates a cryo field that will convert into cryo damage to all polearm claymore and sword users when using their normal attack, but keep in mind that since he converts any normal attacks to cryo, he will not work well with someone like Razor if you are using him as a physical main DPS, since Chongyun covers him with cryo. Same goes with other Electro characters or for any characters you are using. By activating Chongyun's burst that costs only 40 energy, he will create cryo blades that will basically just create a quick cryo explosion. Overall, since Chongyun converts any claymore sword or polearm user into cryo damage, he can be good for creating melting reactions or even help out other cryo units to make them deal cryo damage on normal attacks such as Kaeya, but he can still be replaceable with better cryo units such as Kaeya or Rosaria and other 5-star cryo characters. Xinyan is a 4-star pyro claymore user. Her skill creates pyro shield, yet it's one of the weakest shields in the game, though while Xinyan is in shield mode, the more opponents she hits with her claymore, the better, as she sometimes deals pyro damage on every few hits, while her burst deals some pyro damage, which is slightly better than Amber's burst, but still really doesn't help that much. Now Xinyan overall isn't really good. She is like somewhere between a physical damage dealer and shielder, but honestly she doesn't do that good of a job in either. Her shield compared to others isn't that good, and other physical damage dealers like Eula performs better than her, maybe also Razor as well. Either way, if you really like Xinyan and want to use her badly, then you can do it. You can have her as a physical damage dealer, but I mostly recommend you to use her as a shielder or a burst support. But in the end, way too many better characters are out there than Xinyan, unfortunately. Chi-Chi is a 5-star cryo sword user. Just like Barbara, she is a healer, pretty much same with duration and this extremely long cooldown on skill. Chi-Chi's skill automatically restores on-field party members' health while dealing cryo damage on nearby enemies, but if Chi-Chi attacks, the whole team gets healed. But luckily her burst makes her shine. Burst makes her create AoE cryo damage, which by that you can heal your party members extremely quickly when dealing damage damage and it lasts for 15s. Though it also has an energy cost of 80. Overall, Chi-Chi and Barbara are pretty relatable in gameplay. Same duration, same energy cost, longest cooldowns, and are both healers. Barbara being a hydro healer while Chi-Chi the cryo one. Baishu is a 5-star Dendro catalyst. His skill makes him throw a Dendro thing that will apply Dendro to nearby opponents, and once it does that 3 times, it comes back and heals all of your party members based on Baishu's HP. Now his burst makes him create a Dendro shield which is instantly destroyed if hit. However, new one is generated every 2.5 seconds, and this is happening for the next 14 seconds. After 14 seconds his shield stops generating as he exits his burst mode. This shield also heals your party members and buffs the damage of Dendro reactions for 6 seconds. This one-hit shield increases party members' resistance to interruption and also makes them deal a Dendro damage, though do keep in mind that it has 80 energy cost. Overall, Baishu is a great option for Dendro teams or even a Fiorina teams, as he is a great healer. Although if you already have someone like Jean on your Fiorina team, I don't think that it's necessary to pull for Baishu if planning to get him only for Fiorina, but Baishu will always be a great fit in Dendro teams. Ketching is a 5-star Electro sword user. By using Ketching's skill, she places an object that if you press her skill twice, then she will teleport to that object and her damage will be converted into Electro for the next 5 seconds. When you use her burst, Ketching will deal multiple slices of Electro damage, and the best part is that it only costs 40 energy. After that her crit rate increases by 15% for 8 seconds. Either way, Ketching works best at aggravate teams as it increases Electro damage based on the elemental mastery of the character, so make sure to work on elemental mastery for Ketching as well. Ningguang is a 4-star Geo catalyst. When you tap her skill, she will create a screen that will last for quite some time and basically block certain attacks that are mainly projectiles. Also, when a Geo character passes by Jade's screen, they will have their Geo damage increased. As for her burst, she creates these Geo gems that will fire towards enemies, dealing nice damage, and if Jade's screen is nearby, then an extra amounts of gems will be released. Though sometimes those gems can be wonky and can hit the ground and things like this, but in general those gems are automatically fired towards the closest enemies. Now Ningguang should be used as a main DPS as she deals good amounts of damage and can especially work in Geo teams. Those shields are recommended for her, so Zhongli is recommended when using Ningguang. Or if you don't have Zhongli, then Layla or Noelle, as she does have slow movements and some difficulties dodging attacks. Beidou is a 4-star Electro Claymore user. By holding her skill, Electro Shield pops up, and by letting go she swings her Claymore, dealing Electro damage. She can use her skill every 7 seconds. Her burst creates Lighting Discharge, which is great as it creates Electro chain damage even off field, and her burst costs 80 energy with 20-second cooldown and 15-second duration. Her constellations make her burst even way better, as at C1 shield is created when using burst, and at C2 Electro chain damage can jump to 2 additional targets. Overall, Beidou is great and works in a lot of teams that need an Electro applicator, though it's better to use her against multiple enemies since it's obvious that her kit has not much use against single enemies. Kadahara Kazuha is a 5-star Anemo sword user. His skill lifts him while grouping enemies, and from mid-air he can plunge attack grouped enemies. When using his burst, he creates this area of leaves that is mostly used for swirl reactions and can even work with characters like Bennett. His broken burst has only 60 energy cost with 15-second cooldown that lasts for 8 seconds. Now if you need an emo character in your team and have this guy, seriously just use him. Like, I probably don't need to explain this, but he literally replaces the Anemo Archon himself and is like the perfect Anemo character because he has phenomenal grouping. Amazing for swirl reactions, so he has anything that an Anemo god should have. Thoma is a 4-star Pyro Spear user. When using his skill, Thoma creates a shield, and on top of that his burst creates it as well. So if Thoma's shield from his skill doesn't break before using burst shield, then it creates something that is called shield stacking, though his burst costs 80 energy and both his skill and burst shields have a duration of 8 seconds if not shield stacked. Shield stacking does increase the duration of Thoma's shield, it's like in shield upgrade. Also, when using his burst, Thoma releases fire every second, which can be really good for burgeon reactions. Now Thoma is a pretty solid pyro unit, though can be easily replaced by someone like Xiangling. However, if you need a shielder you can use him as a pyro shielder, but then again he is easily replaced by better shielders such as Zhongli. Overall, Thoma gets the job done, so he is viable, but the problem is that he can easily be replaced by better units. Kamisato Ayaka is a 5-star cryo sword user. She is a very fast ice bridger as she has an ability to do this cryo cryo sprinting, which also makes it easier to dodge attacks. Now when you press her skill, she just does a quick cryo area damage, which should be used for energy recharging. But also thanks to her passive talent, Kamisato Ayaka's normal and charged attacks deal 30% increased damage for the next 6 seconds after using her skill. Now as for her burst, well, Ayaka creates a snowstorm in her forward direction, which has an high energy cost of 80. What this snowstorm does is that it constantly keeps hitting enemies for the next 5 seconds, and during that time you can create reactions such as freeze or melt. As for recommendations, I would only recommend you to pull for Ayaka if you want a cryo main DPS. Kamisato Ayato is a 5-star Hydro Sword user. When using his skill, Ayato's sword is converted into this massive Hydro damage that deals very nice damage, and what Ayato basically does is one of those anime animations where he automatically just does his sword moves, dealing Hydro damage without being able to plunge or charge attack. His skill also works on stacks, so more stacks he has the better damage, while his burst is like absolutely broken okay. Basically what it does is that it creates this really massive Hydro field that constantly deals Hydro damage and lasts for the next 18 seconds, and even increases the normal attack damage of party members. However, it also has 80 energy cost. Now I know that I made him look like if he is an easy SS tier character, but remember that his strong burst has high energy cost, as I just mentioned, of course, and due to his skill. Ayato is kinda in this weird position of being between a sub DPS and main DPS, so I recommend you to think wisely before deciding to pull for him. But he is fantastic anyway, and yes, he does work for Hyperbloom teams. Raiden Shogun aka Electro Archon is a 5-star Electro Polearm user. Raiden's skill creates a shard of euthymia, which constantly deals electro damage when attacking enemies while using her burst. Raiden pulls a sword from her heart, which when used deals a huge AoE electro damage, then her damage is converted into powerful electro damage, and by dealing that electro damage, she will regenerate energy for all nearby party members. Her burst energy costs 90 while lasting for 7 seconds with 18-second cooldown. Now Raiden is an excellent sub DPS support and even main DPS. In fact, I think that Raiden Shogun is currently the best Electro character in the game, so pull for a top-class Electro unit. Kujou Sara is a 4-star Electro bow user. Her skill makes her quickly teleport back for a little bit, allowing Sara to plant Electro Explosion with her charged attack, while her burst makes her strike lightings that last, I would say, up to 3 seconds, then has 20-second cooldown with 80 energy cost. Electro application is not that bad, as it stays on for quite a while after those 3-second terrifying lightings strike, though keep in mind that Kujou Sara's constellations make her way better and useful, as at C2 she already plants the bomb when teleporting, meaning no charged shot is required, but the bomb is unfortunately a bit weaker. As for C6, which increases critical damage of electro damage by 60% if their attack is increased by Kujou Sara's skill, making her a fantastic support for electro characters. Overall, I would mainly recommend first getting constellations, like as many of them as possible, even if it means to C6 before using her, as Kujou Sara performs way better with constellations than without them. I mean, I know that it goes the same for the rest of the characters. However, Kujou Sara's constellations are like a must-get. Once you get her to C6, you can use her in Electro teams and can also work really well with characters such as Raiden Shogun. Yae Miko is a 5-star Electro catalyst. By using her skill, Yae Miko plants this Electro pillar, and by using it 3 times, she will place 3 of them, and maximum number of those pillars that can be placed is 3. The point is that these pillars do increased electro damage, so more of them is planted the better. These pillars last for 14 seconds on the field. Not to mention that these pillars are also very important for the burst. Let me explain. So basically, Yae Miko's burst deals an electro lighting that deals electro area damage, but without any of the pillars she will just do 1 quick AoE electro damage. But when you have all 3 of the pillars out, then she will deal 3 additional thunder strikes, so you want to make sure that you prepare for her burst to make it worthwhile, especially when it has 90 energy cost. Although you can still find better electro characters that are literally 4 stars, such as Fischl Cookie, and then even pull for Raiden Shogun instead of Yae Miko. Yae is still not the worst option to pull for. In fact, she is better option than someone like Sino, as she deals lots of electro damage off field. So if you want another amazing electro character, then Yae Miko is an excellent choice to go for. Yoimiya is a 5-star pyro bow user. When you press Yoimiya's skill, her damage will get infused with pyro on her bow, so she will start shooting fire arrows, which will obviously deal increased pyro damage. This ability lasts for 10 seconds out of 18-second cooldown. But when you use her burst, Yoimiya launches into the air firing her fireworks that makes her deal AoE pyro damage and even mark one of the hit opponents. What this marking does is that party members excluding Yoimiya get additional pyro damage on that specific marked opponent that they are hitting every 2 seconds, which lasts for 10 seconds as well, and if the specific marked opponent is defeated in those 10 seconds, the marking will pass to another nearby enemy. Overall, the burst has 60 energy cost, so Yoimiya really is not the best character when going against multiple enemies, but fantastic when going against a single target enemy. So I would mainly recommend you to pull for Yoimiya if needing someone for single target, but to be honest, there are better main DPS characters you can find. Yoimiya is still fine anyway, but unless you like Yoimiya or need a pyro single target shooter, then I recommend you to focus on getting other 5-star characters. Goru is a 4-star Geo bow user. By using his skill, well, he places this Geo field of war that really depends on how many Geo characters you have in your party setup. If you have 3 of the Geo characters in the party setup, it will increase Geo damage bonus of the Geo party members and it lasts for 10 seconds. Now his burst is pretty much just like his skill. It gives buffs to the Geo characters, except that it also follows you around and therefore also does extra Geo damage every 1.5 seconds, and it has 80 energy cost. Now some of his constellations also take a part, as at C4 he is able to heal party members based on his defense, and his C6 increases crit damage of all of Geo characters in the party setup. So just by paying attention you realize that Goru only works in Geo teams and scales off defense, making him a very situational character as he is very limited on which teams should you use him. Sangonomiya Kokomi is a 5-star Hydro Catalyst. When you use her skill, she creates this jellyfish that deals hydro damage to nearby opponents and heals party members. This effect lasts for 12 seconds. Now you should mainly use her burst to refresh the duration of her skill. But to also be clearer what her burst does, Kokomi will create this water thingy that will increase her damage while also healing party members whenever she will attack. Also, like turning her into main DPS there, as when you switch to another character it cancels the effects. But if you don't switch, then it lasts for 10 seconds and costs 70 energy. Now even though Kokomi has damage and healing increasements, her biggest problem is that due to her passive talent she lacks a lot on critical rate. That's why Kokomi is better off just being a support than a damage dealer. Overall, Kokomi can fit in Fiorina teams as she is a fantastic healer, and since she is also a great hydro applicator, she can also fit in hydro teams such as Electro Charge. Xiao is a 4-star Anemo Claymore user. Now her skill is super fun and fantastic for exploration, as when you hold it, she starts rolling and you can cancel her rolling anytime and she will do an Anemo kick, but if not, Xiao will roll for the next 10 seconds, but the longer she rolls the longer the cooldown. The cooldown ranges from 6 to 11 seconds. When you use Xiao's burst, she will plant her buddy that will also create a big circle healing the party members and dealing Anemo damage to nearby opponents, but will also spawn that Muji Daruma, which if characters are above 70% health it will just deal Anemo damage to nearby opponents, but if party member has their HP lower than 70% then it will heal them. However, if you get C1 Xiao you no longer have to worry about that 70% mark, as at C1 the thing does heal and deal damage to enemies both at the same time. Overall, I would recommend using Xiao if you have her but don't have Jean, then you can use her instead of Jean as an Anemo support healer, or you can also just use Xiao for exploring. Nahida aka the Dendro Archon herself is a 5-star Dendro Catalyst. What her skill basically does is it applies Dendro to enemies and linking them together and lasts for the next 25 seconds. When you hold it you can mark and link up to 8 enemies to deal Dendro reactions between them, and once you do deal reactions to enemies it will reapply more Dendro to enemies every 2.5 seconds, making her skill spammable for more Dendro reactions. This effect is called Tree Karma Purification besides her broken Dendro application. Nahida also has a fun side of her ability, as she can collect resources even from far away, though of course the distance is still limited anyway, and also can even read minds of the NPCs, though they must be in Sumeru, otherwise the mind reading won't work at all, since people of Sumeru have those Akasha terminals. Now Nahida's burst makes her spawn Shrine of Maya, which pretty much buffs Nahida's Tree Karma Purification, but also depends on other party members' elements. Pyro increases even more damage for Tree Karma Purification. Electro decreases Tree Karma's purification interval, which allows her skill to trigger faster, while Hydro makes Nahida's burst last longer, also due to Nahida's fantastic passive talent. This Shrine of Maya, which is Nahida's burst, greatly increases party members' elemental mastery. This burst has an energy cost of 50 and lasts for 15 seconds. Overall, Nahida can really fit into any Dendro team. Like, it's not surprising that the Dendro Archon herself is the best Dendro character in the game anyway. Tainari is a 5-star Dendro bow user. His skill makes him throw a thing that will create pretty much a small AoE Dendro damage that lasts for 8 seconds and applies Dendro to opponents while taunting him, but most importantly this effect decreases his charge shots by 2.4 seconds, since his normal charge shot takes about 2.7 seconds and since it decreases by 2.4 seconds. His charge shot only takes 0.3 seconds to deal Dendro shot, while increasing his elemental mastery. Tighnari can use those quick shots 3 times in the next 12 seconds before this effect goes away, while his burst that only costs 40 energy is pretty unique, since Tighnari shoots those shafts that basically track the opponents and then quickly stick to them, dealing Dendro damage. Overall, Tighnari works as a main DPS and can fit into basic Dendro teams, such as Hyperbloom or other. Either way, at C4 his burst even buffs the elemental mastery of the entire team, which makes him a great support as well, but would mainly recommend to use him for DPS that charge shots in Dendro team. Klee is a 4-star Dendro bow user. Her skill makes her throw a boomerang that automatically comes back to you, but it should really be used just for recharging the burst. It has 12-second cooldown. Now Klee's burst costs 60 energy and it creates a Dendro field that lasts for 6 seconds, which can be extended to 9 seconds by creating required reactions. Now to be honest, Klee is just a worse version of Dendro Traveler, even though she can still be used in Dendro teams and in reality is not that bad, but the problem is that her burst does not bring that much value and can be easily replaced by another better Dendro unit. In fact, pretty much almost every Dendro character including Dendro Traveler, who just does a better job than her. Wanderer is a 5-star Anemo catalyst. When you use Wanderer's skill, he will start what I like to say floating in the air. From there, you cannot plunge attack, but only do damage and basically move around and works on the bar, which when it runs out, then Wanderer's skill has ended, meaning that Wanderer no longer floats or flies or however you wanna call it, and then you need to wait another 6 seconds for Wanderer's cooldown of his skill to be over, to use it again. Next up is Wanderer's burst, which by pressing it, Wanderer will make enemies suffer with his kick by doing great Anemo area damage to them multiple times with an energy cost of 60. Overall, Wanderer does require quite a lot of investment. He can be really good if highly invested, so of course things like getting him constellations and teams that will give him great support will work, and his passive talents help a lot as well. So pull for Wanderer if you want an Anemo main DPS or just someone phenomenal for exploration. Dia is a 5-star Pyro Claymore user. By using Dia's skill, she creates Pyro Field that increases active party members' resistance to interruption and deals Pyro damage every 2.5 seconds in 12-second duration. When using her burst, she enters automatic punching, which Dia auto deals Pyro DMG to enemies without clicking, and with clicking she just does it faster. Her auto punching lasts for 4 seconds, which you can cancel it by jumping, as when Dia jumps. Her burst cancels and her burst costs 70 energy, but to be honest, Dia currently doesn't really fit into any decent team, because she is replaceable by pretty much any character that just performs better than her. I guess that she can be used in Pyro teams, but honestly it would be better off to just use someone like Hu Tao, Diluc, maybe even Klee or anyone else for that matter, because the amount of value Dia brings is not enough compared to other characters. So yes, I am sorry to say this, but Dia is currently one of the worst characters in Genshin Impact. Alhaitham is a 5-star sword user. Now Alhaitham works in this way that he relies on mirrors. Once you have a mirror, his attacks are converted into Dendro damage. The mirrors can be obtained through charged or plunge attacks. After every 12 seconds, his elemental skill or his elemental burst. Maximum number of mirrors that he can have is 3. Besides converting Alhaitham's damage into Dendro, these mirrors also do this projection attack, which is like if they fall from the sky and deal area damage, and the damage scales on how many mirrors out of 3 does Alhaitham have. However, each one of those mirrors lasts for 4 seconds and then it goes away. Now besides Alhaitham's mirrors, moving on to his abilities, his skill is rush attack, pretty much like Kechink's skill. Rushes towards enemies, and if holding the thing, you can aim at where Alhaitham will dash. As for his burst, Alhaitham will spawn a giant Dendro thingy that will deal AoE Dendro damage multiple times, while also consuming Alhaitham's mirrors for damage. After Alhaitham's burst disappears, Alhaitham will regain mirrors based on the amount of mirrors consumed, so it is important to keep an eye on the number of mirrors Alhaitham has, but in other than that, he is a pretty broken main DPS character, in fact one of the best current main DPS characters. He also fits well in Hyperbloom teams, so he is mostly recommended to use in spread or Hyperbloom teams. Nilou is a 5-star sword user. Once you use Nilou's skill, her damage will get converted into Hydro, so if you want Nilou to be an on-field Hydro applicator, then just use her Hydro normal attacks. Once using her skill, lasting for 8 seconds, but if you want Nilou to be an off-field, then you use Nilou Nilu's skill 3 more times, and then this Hydro Circle will be created around the active character, which is great for applying Hydro and lasts for 12 seconds. Her burst, that has 70 energy cost, makes her create a Hydro area damage, and the enemies that take damage in her Hydro explosion will be marked, and after like a second, they will take extra damage. Anyway, Nilu should be only used in Bloom teams that have only Dendro or Hydro characters. The reason on why is because of her passive talent, which when you use Nilu's skill, by either spamming normal attack or her skill those 3 more times, she will increase the party member's elemental mastery by 100 for 10 seconds whenever they are hit by Dendro attacks such as Bloom, which ends up working perfectly in Nilu team. And another thing she will do is, instead of creating those normal Dendro cores, she creates bountiful cores which can only Bloom. You cannot Burgeon or Hyper Bloom them, but the Bloom on those cores is just way stronger than in those normal Dendro cores. Though keep in mind that Nilu also does scale off HP. As the more HP you build on Nilu, then the more damage will be created by those bountiful cores. Sino is a 5-star Electro Polearm user. When using Sino's skill, he will dash into the targeted opponent. But normal skill is definitely used only for energy recharging, and it has a cooldown of around 7 seconds. But the most important part of his kit is definitely his burst, because once you activate his burst, not only that his damage will be converted into electro, he will also gain other cool abilities, like increasement of his elemental mastery and resistance to interruption, and even will be immune to electro charged damage. And lastly, his cooldown of his skill will be decreased to 3 seconds, which by using his skill inside of his burst, you will deal better damage and will even increase the duration of his burst. His burst lasts for 10 seconds minimum, but by using his 3-second skill, it can maximum last up to 18 seconds. However, his burst does cost 80 energy, therefore he requires high investment and is not easy to build at all, because you have to balance building his attack, energy recharge and elemental mastery, because if those aren't built that well, he will either take too much time to recharge his burst or do bad damage, which then makes him a useless character. So Sino is not a bad character, in fact can be a good DPS for Dendro teams. So if you aren't willing to build him for Hyperbloom or aggravate reactions, then I don't recommend you pulling for him. In fact, even if he can be a pretty powerful main DPS, you can still find better DPS characters, such as Raiden Shogun, or even 4 stars, such as Kuki, Fischl, or Beidou. Candace is a 4-star Hydro Polearm user. Candace uses a shield on her skill, and by holding it, she will deal better damage than by tapping it, while also obtaining more energy particles. While her burst that costs 60 energy lasts for 9 seconds, it creates 3 of these Hydro waves that deal AoE Hydro damage, while also increasing characters' elemental damage, while also having the same elemental infusion, such as someone like Chongyun, but instead Candace converts all of Polearm's claymores and swords uses into Hydro damage, and her C1 does extend her burst, so that constellation makes Candace slightly better. In the end, Candace is not that good at all, though can be fine for Bloom reactions, but can still be replaceable with other Hydro units who perform in Dendro reactions better than her. Carve is a 4-star Dendro claymore user. When you use his skill, he creates this area of scanning, which makes sure that all the Dendro cores explode when they are scanned, which creates Bloom reactions. Though by destroying Dendro cores, Carve takes away those opportunities where Burgeon or Hyperbloom reactions could be created. While at the start of his burst, he does another AoE Dendro damage that makes all the Dendro cores go boom, then also converts Carve's damage into Dendro and increasing his resistance to interruption. Also due to his passive talent, his elemental mastery increases. All of this lasts for 12 seconds, however it also has 80 energy cost, so Carve is really not that good in my opinion. Even though his burst is pretty good, it's hard to obtain, and during that time, you have to use his abilities that just take away better reactions. So he is easily replaceable with other Dendro main DPS characters, such as Tainari or Alhaitham, and yes, I do think that even Kole is better than Carve. So unless you don't have Nilu and need someone for Bloom reactions, this is where Carve can get the job done. Dori is a 4-star Electro Claymore user. Her skill makes her throw the lamp at the opponents, which deals an electro damage and can be done every 9 seconds. But her burst is the main part of her kit, and what it does is it makes Dori plants her Ginny, which lasts for 12 seconds, and what this Ginny does is that it has this unique connection, which only connects to you if you are nearby. It also regenerates energy for all party members and even lowers the enemy's health if the connection is between you and Ginny. However, it is another one of those high energy costs, which means that her burst of course costs 80 energy, though keep in mind that of course its range range is not that long and pretty hard to use as well. Not easy to control, so Dori is not mostly recommended for Fiorina teams, not to mention that the amount of healing Ginny does completely depends on Dori's HP, so if you have better healer options, use them instead of Dori for Fiorina team. So I do not really see Dori fitting into any decent team, unless you do not have other better energy supporters and essentially need energy recharge. Then I would say it's fine to use her, but she does take up a space in party setup. However, if you have someone like Raiden, just use her instead, as she also restores party members' energy and is obviously just better than Dori. Leany is a 5-star pyro bow user. Now his main role are bow charged attacks, which when you get to level 2, which is when you wait long enough until this cat symbol appears, Leany will fire increased damage than he would in normal charge shot and even spawn this cat in a hat that distracts the opponents and fires at nearby opponent once it is destroyed or out of duration. Also Leany when firing those arrows also sacrifices some of his HP for gaining a stack, but that only happens if he is above 60%. He can max get 5 stacks. Now speaking of stacks, his skill does pyro area damage in front of Leany's nearby enemies, while also consuming all of the available stacks, meaning that more stacks the better because of damage increasement. It also regenerates Leany's health in return to help him get more stacks in the future, and if that cat in a hat created by Leany's level 2 charged shot is on the field, well, skill makes it explode, dealing even extra more damage. Now his burst costs 60 energy, and as soon as the burst button is pressed, Leany turns into this walking hat that apparently has a cat in it, and once you get close to the enemies, just cancel it and it will explode in their face, or if you don't do that, it will automatically do that cancelling explosion after 3 seconds. Overall, Leany is obviously a main DPS, who seems like just a way better version of Klee, and because of his passive talent. That says by running more pyro characters in one team, increases even more of the damage, you would want to be adding at least one more pyro character in his team and use a shielder like Zhongli. As Leany, who is an explosive bow user, he needs some protection. Lynette is a 4-star Anemo sword user. You can either press her skill and she will deal Anemo damage to nearby opponents, or hold it and has pretty much the same ability as Yellen, but unlike with Yellen, who can mark multiple enemies, Lynette can only do on one nearby opponent that you decide on which opponent she attacks. Just make sure to not go out of range, otherwise none of the enemies will be marked, so Lynette won't attack either. Now Lynette's burst makes her spawn a hat that will keep dealing Anemo damage to nearby opponents while distracting them. It also buffs party members' attack, based on how many elements are in the party setup. This ability lasts for 12 seconds and has an energy cost of 70. Now, you get Lynette for free as soon as you reach adventure rank 25, so she can easily replace Anemo Traveler, although later on Lynette could easily be replaced by better Anemo characters, such as Kazuha, Sucrose or even Venti, but she is still pretty solid character, who can get the job done, so if you like her, you can use her too in teams that need an Anemo character, specifically for swirl reactions, and you can even use Lynette as a main DPS, once you get her to C6, as she obtains increased Anemo infusion damage. Primanet is a 4-star cryo claymore user. When you use his skill, Primanet will enter a state that is called Purse Timer, which can deal either physical damage and cryo damage depending on what level is your Primanet. If it reaches maximum level, then he will deal highest physical damage. However, for maximum cryo damage, just tap E button twice, or if you're not playing on computer, just simply use his skill 2 times in a row and he will deal maximum cryo damage, which also means that Primanet will not then enter Purse Timer, as you will interrupt it by using his skill twice. Though to keep in mind that, when he creates a shatter reaction, his damage will be increased, all thanks to one of his passive talents, while his burst will make him enter that scuba mode, which will decrease the cooldown of his skill, which will let Primanet pretty much constantly deal his Purse Timer damage, or however you wanna call it, and it will also increase his resistance to interruption. His burst costs 60 energy and lasts for 10 seconds. Overall, Primanet is not good at all, since he is a 4-star cryo physical damage dealer, which is simply not that good, not to mention that at times, when his skill isn't activated or his burst, he will literally just deal normal physical damage. Overall, you can still of course use Primanet, but there are better main DPS characters that will do a better job than Primanet. Fiorina aka the Hydro Archon is a 5-star Hydro sword user. Now, Fiorina has this very unique ability that changes her skills. Let me explain. By holding her charge attack, Fiorina changes her clothes and her skill ability. Black clothes spread water attacking buddies. Fantastic for Hydro reactions, such as vaporizing or any other Dendro ones, like Bloom or Hyperbloom, while white clothes spawn a healing jellyfish. Now her burst that costs only only 60 energy is also very unique. That works on like the damage system. Let me explain this as well. Her burst is a buff based on how much damage has been taken or restored. The more, the better, so due to that effect, she works great with healers like Jean, Baiju and Kokomi, and main DPS characters that work well with Furina's burst are Hu Tao, Neuvillette, etc. since they lose their damage, while also healing themselves, making them great options for Furina as well. This effect lasts for 18 seconds overall. Furina has so much of those crazy and useful abilities, making her one of the best current characters in the game. I believe that she can fit into any team and really just help out, though running her with a healer is recommended. Either way, Furina's abilities are so crazy to the point she even completely makes ice bridging irrelevant. Like why use characters like Kaeya, Ayaka or Wriothesley, when you have Furina, who can literally just walk on water. Neuvillette is a 5-star main DPS Hydro Dragon Catalyst. Now, Neuvillette works on this really powerful charge attack that is basically broken. However, the amount of time it takes Neuvillette to recharge is quite long and his charged attack can be interrupted unfortunately, but luckily shortcuts exist to instantly start attacking. First off is by using his skill and then charge attack, he will instantly start shooting. When using his skill, he drops 3 of those source water droplets that next time Neuvillette charge attacks. Without using his skill or burst before charge attacking, he will consume 3 of those droplets that will also heal him. Now his burst that costs 70 energy is pretty much the same thing, like his skill except that it deals better hydro area damage and this time drops 6 source water droplets. However, when Neuvillette is above 50% health, he will drain his health when charge attacking, but can instantly be restored by picking source water droplets that heal you. Because of that he works fantastic with Furina and he is so strong that you can easily clear hard content using Neuvillette solo, as long as there aren't any hydro enemies around. The characters that can support him are like Kuki, Bidu and even Fischl for electro charged reaction, Xiangling for vaporize and freeze with characters like Kaeya or Rosaria also helps, because these units by freezing the enemies increase Neuvillette's resistance to interruption, or just use shielders like Layla or Zhongli, as they help him out with protection as well. Either way I consider Neuvillette as the best current main DPS, though in reality Neuvillette and Alhaitham are currently the best main DPS characters in the game. Navia is a 5-star Geo Claymore user. Now Navia's skill works on those stacks by the name of shrapnel stacks, which you obtain by picking up those crystals that are used for shielding from crystallize reaction, and she can have up to 6 stacks at once. By using Navia's skill, Navia will use her umbrella that is apparently a shotgun, while also consuming all of the stacks, and of course the damage depends on how many stacks did she consume, and the general damage is very broken. This skill has a cooldown of 9 seconds and also, after its usage, it converts Navia's normal attacking damage into increased geo damage. Now Navia's burst that costs 60 energy and lasts for 12 seconds, just fires cannons from the sky, dealing geo damage, which helps a lot with crystallize reactions for Navia's stacks. Now Navia I would say is mainly a main DPS, as her shotgun. If you have lots of stacks and are really close to the enemies, she deals completely broken damage. She could also be a sub DPS because of her burst, but her burst damage is not that high, and I think that developers mainly putted that burst to help out with Navia's stacks. So yeah, I would use her as a main DPS, and also Dendro and Anemo aren't recommended elements to have in Navia team, just because, if you have any characters with other 4 elements, Navia's damage is increased. Wriothesley is a 5-star cryo catalyst. So Wriothesley is a cryo catalyst, so he does cryo damage on normal attacks, but when his skill is activated, if Wriothesley is above 50% HP, then he does increased normal attack damage, while in the meantime also losing his own HP. All thanks to his passive talent. With him losing HP he gains stacks that increase his damage. This effect lasts for 10 seconds. As for his burst, it's literally like a cryo version of Wanderer, as Wriothesley deals powerful cryo damage in front of him multiple times. It has energy cost of 60, so Wriothesley is another one of those powerful cryo main DPS characters, who deals lots of cryo damage. As for his teams, he works great in freeze and melt teams. However, a healer is highly recommended for him, since it keeps him above 50% HP, and as for like him and any other cryo characters, support like Shenna is also nice to have. Charlotte is a 4-star cryo catalyst that basically uses her own camera as a weapon. By using her skill, she marks up to 5 enemies, which constantly deals cryo damage around every second for the next 6 seconds. If the ability is pressed. However, when holding this skill, Charlotte will enter this mode, where she will aim at the enemies, like taking a picture, which lets you decide which 5 of the enemies to mark. But keep in mind that if you are gonna hold this ability, wait for this square to get bigger, which takes like 2 seconds, then let go, because if you don't, the marking will be as good as when tapping, but when you do, the marking is more effective, as it lasts longer, but unfortunately with a longer cooldown as well, while her burst creates cryo field that continuously applies cryo damage and also heals your party members. However, it only lasts for 4 seconds. Cooldown is 20 seconds and energy cost is 80, though at C1 her burst is even much more useful, as it will mark healed party members, which will basically give huge amount of healing bonus every 2 seconds, which also lasts for the next 6 seconds. Overall, Charlotte's healing ability is pretty strong, making her a good choice in Furina team, but honestly can also be easily replaced by better healers, who are not so energy hungry, or even cryo units that do a better job at applying cryo. Razor is a 4-star Electro Claymore user. Now his skill is just used for energy recharging, and what it does is by tapping, Razor just deals an electro damage to nearby opponent, and by holding Razor will deal a bit of AoE electro damage. Now his burst costs 80 energy with 15-second cooldown, and what it does is basically summon this Electro Wolf that will really help out Razor, and it will greatly increase Razor's resistance to interruption and most importantly deal electro damage alongside Razor's normal attack that will of course deal physical damage. Overall, Razor is only recommended if you enjoy playing with physical damage dealers. Even when you are that type, you can still pull for Eula and replace him with her, but in other than that, nowadays compared to other characters, Razor is unfortunately barely viable in gameplay and in physical teams. During his burst, he works best with cryo characters that give out good cryo applications such as Kaeya. Diona is a 4-star cryo bow user. As soon as you press D on a skill, she will fire a cryo damage into the enemies, and then after that create a cryo shield. You can either press or hold her skill button, however holding it is recommended as she creates a stronger shield, and Diona's skill even increases party members' speed. As for burst that has 80 energy cost, Diona throws her creation and upon landing creates this cryo field that heals the characters and deals cryo damage for the next 12 seconds, while also decreases enemies' attacks by 10%. Also, I wanna mention that if you get to C6 Diona, then her burst will buff the elemental mastery by a lot, so to focus on her constellations. Although Diona is not a bad character, she can still be replaced by better shielders such as Layla or Zhongli and better healers. In other than that, she is a great cryo support that works as a shielder as well, and works great in cryo teams and even helps out physical damage dealers, as having an Electro and Diona will also create superconduct reactions. Sucrose is a 4-star Anemo catalyst. All of the enemies that are caught in Sucrose's skill will be pulled towards its location, which happens pretty quickly. When pressing that Q button, Sucrose plants flying Anemo thingy that will continuously pull in nearby opponents. This effect lasts for 6 seconds, which will be great for creating swirl reactions, though it also costs 80 energy. Sucrose is a fantastic Anemo support character, not just because she groups the enemies together, but also because she is very good for increasing other party members' elemental mastery either by swirl effects and her skill or burst hitting opponents. So if in need of elemental mastery, then Sucrose will always be a great option. Fischl is a 4-star electro bow user. By using her skill, she plants Oz that just constantly deals electro damage to nearby opponents for the next 10 seconds. Now her burst that costs 60 energy makes Fischl transform into Oz for that 1 quick second, which it allows you to dash through the enemies and deal lighting electro damage to them once Fischl gets close to them. Once she transforms into her normal human form, Oz will be summoned once again from where Fischl changed back into her human form. Overall, Fischl is an amazing electro unit because of the amount of electro reactions that Oz can deal, making her one of the most wanted electro characters in the game. Bennett is a 4-star pyro sword user. His skill just basically makes him do a quick pyro damage if pressed. However, you can also hold his skill and he will deal more pyro damage, and if fully charged, he will push himself to deal such strong pyro damage that will basically throw him back, so I do mostly not recommend to fully charge his skill. Now as for Bennett's popular broken burst, that is his main part of his kit. So in case you didn't know, Bennett's burst heals party member that is on field, if below 70% health, and if above then buffs damage. However, at C1 he is even more broken because it gets rid of that 70% restriction. So Bennett really is one of the best support characters in the game because like his burst helps so much with buffing damage and fast healing as well, and he can really fit into any team. As long as you don't activate his final constellation, since it gives away pyro infusion and then limits Bennett on teams. Mona is a 5-star Hydro Catalyst. Now Mona actually does have a unique sprint as she turns into the water, therefore she travels faster than most of the generic characters in the game. While her turning into the water can make it even easier to dodge attacks, so she is just like Ayaka. But unlike Ayaka, who is Cryo, Mona is Hydro, so she can't Ice Bridge. Her skill makes her plant her Hydro Phantom of Fate, which will hit nearby opponents a few times, dealing Hydro damage, so it can be used for vaporizing reactions. While her burst is the most important part of her kit because she traps the enemies by her bubble, or whatever you wanna call it, which lasts for about 5 seconds, and during those 5 seconds, if you pop the bubble on the trapped enemy by simply hitting it, well, it increases the Hydro damage that the enemy takes when the bubble pops, making Mona a great support unit. So Mona is good for buffing damage. She is also good for reactions such as Vaporize, Electro Charge, Swirl, and even Frozen, but can still be replaced by other Hydro units who perform better in Dendro teams. Mika is a 4-star Cryo Bow user. By tapping Mika's skill, he will quickly fire off the arrows, but when holding his skill you enter the aiming mode. Either way, the point is that Mika's skill applies cryo while also increasing party members' attack speed. Another unique thing that it does is that it increases party members' physical damage depending on the amount of stacks. Now as for his burst that costs 70 energy, basically all it does is healing an active character that normal attacks the enemies based on Mika's max HP, meaning that not any damage is dealt here, and because of that his burst cannot apply cryo to the enemies. This effect lasts for 15 seconds. Now I would say that Mika mostly relies on constellations, just like in a way that Kujou Sara and Faruzan do, as when you get to C6 Mika, he will increase critical damage for physical damage dealers for 60%. So Mika obviously works in physical teams, and in general you should always try to go for C6 Mika as he becomes way better here. In other case, if you don't use physical or already have your own physical teams that have their own supports in the party setup already, then Mika is not recommended at all. Arataki Itto is a 5-star Geo Claymore user. Now Itto works on those what I like to call strength stacks, and basically what they do is give Itto a really speedy charge attacks that just deal a lot of Geo damage, and just by normal attacking, Itto gets a stack on his 2nd and 4th normal attack. Itto can have up to 5 of those stacks. When using his skill, Itto will spawn his own little pet cow by the name of Yushi, which deals Geo damage to opponents on which it was spawned, and on that hit gives Itto that strength stack while Yushi continues to taunt the enemies for the next 6 seconds. Every time it takes damage on field, it gives an Itto another one of those strength stacks every 2 seconds. Now his burst converts Itto's damage into Geo while also increasing his attack speed, and gives Itto his strength GH stack on every 1st or 3rd hit by his burst Geo attack. The damage overall is powerful during his burst mode, and this effect lasts for 11 seconds with an energy cost of 70. In the end, Arataki Itto, as you just saw, is a Geo main DPS unit who relies on stacks and his burst damage. If you enjoy using Geo characters or simply like Itto, don't hesitate to pull for him, though he can be easily replaced by other Geo characters such as Navia or pretty much every good main DPS character to be honest. Kuki Shinobu is a 4-star Electro Sword user. By tapping her skill, Kuki will create an Electro Circle that will deal spreaded electro damage around every second, which also heals your party members and does an even better job at healing if she is under 50% HP. As for her burst, well, she creates a quick electro field that deals electro damage to opponents that are in the field, but the amount of hits it does, it also depends on Kuki Shinobu's health. Now Kuki is so broken only when it comes to Dendro teams, mostly due to her skill, so teaming her up with Dendro and Hydro character is fantastic, since she can constantly deal Hyperbloom reaction. Yanfei is a 4-star Pyro Catalyst. Now when Yanfei does a normal attack, she will gain this Scarlet Seal stack effect, which reduces the stamina cost of Yanfei's charged attacks while also increasing Yanfei's charged attack damage. Yanfei can have a maximum of 3 Scarlet Seals, and once her charged attack is used she consumes all of the Scarlet Seals. Now her skill just makes her deal a quick AoE pyro damage in front of her while also getting her all possible Scarlet Seals, while her burst does a quick AoE pyro damage and then increases her damage from charged attacks while also getting Yanfei 1 Scarlet Seal per second. This effect lasts for 15 seconds and costs 80 energy. Now her constellations are also very important. At C4 Yanfei obtains a shield when using her burst, also making her a support shielder, and at C6 it increases the maximum number of Scarlet Seals by 1, allowing her to have 4 Scarlet Seals at a time. So Yanfei is a 4-star Pyro main DPS character that can deal powerful area damages that are Pyro mainly from her charged attacks. However, she can be replaced by many better main DPS characters, especially the ones that are pyro, but if you like Yanfei, go for her. She works best with characters that enable pyro reactions such as Hydro for vaporizing or Cryo for melt. Yelan is a 5-star bow user. By holding her skill, Yelan runs around the area marking opponents, and when she is done, she deals Hydro damage to them, which can be also good for creating Hydro reactions, also just like Xingqiu's burst fires his rain swords. Instead, Yelan creates a dice that follows your character around dealing Hydro damage when attacking. Overall, just like Xingqiu, Yelan is super broken as well and works very well with a main DPS like Hu Tao or any teams that are in need for Hydro reactions. Shenhe is a 5-star Cryo Polearm user. Once Shenhe's skill is pressed, she just deals some Cryo damage, but if it's held, she deals an AoE Cryo damage. Most importantly, Shenhe for each party member gains an effect called Icy Quill, which increases their Cryo damage based on Shenhe's attack. This effects go off when its duration expires, which is 10 seconds or 15 seconds, depending if pressed or held, or if all Icy Quills are used up, which is either 5 or 7. Again, depending if pressed or held, though at C6 Shenhe, they don't lose Icy Quills as long as they are normal attacking or charge attacking. Now her burst that costs 80 energy creates this 12-second Cryo field that constantly deals Cryo damage to opponents while also decreasing enemies' Cryo and physical resistance. Also, due to her passive talent, party member gains 15% Cryo damage bonus while inside Shenhe's field. So Shenhe is an overall great support for Cryo characters, so obviously Shenhe works fantastic in Cryo teams, or even physical teams such as with Eula for example, but I would mostly use Shenhe for Cryo teams. Xiangqiu aka the Cloud Retainer is a 5-star Anemo catalyst. By using her skill, Xiangqiu will transform herself into her bird form and then will be able to jump 3 times, then striking at the enemies. When you get to her burst, she will summon a Star Wicker that will heal your party members and even basically turn them into Xiao. So it increases jump height of any character, meaning that she can fit in most of the teams. Pretty much any team that could work with plunge attacks. The burst costs 70 energy and lasts for 16 seconds. Also, as Xiangqiu is an amazing healer, she works great with Furina and is like another Jean. Besides that, she can buff a lot of characters not just by healing but also making them plunge attack, and this works the best with characters like Xiao, Hu Tao or even Diluc. Although Diluc is in general not that good, but with Xiangqiu he can deal very high damage. Yun Jin is a 4-star Geo Polearm user. Now Yun Jin's skill is kinda familiar to Beidou's skill, and what it does is basically just deals Geo damage that will shield Yun Jin from attacks, and the more you hold this ability, the better Geo damage Yun Jin deals. Now Yun Yin's burst quickly does some AoE Geo damage and then increases party members' normal attacks based on Yun Jin's defense. This effect has 60 energy cost and lasts for 12 seconds, or when enemies in total got hit 30 times during its duration. In the end, Yun Jin works best in teams that have completely different elemental types, because of her passive talent that buffs even more damage if as many party members as possible have the different element in the party setup. Also make sure to use her with the main DPS that uses their normal attack. Garming is a 4-star Pyro Claymore user. When you use Garming's skill, he will do a quick pyro plunge attack on nearby enemies, and if Garming has about 50% health, then his plunge damage is increased by 20%. Now as soon as the burst is tapped, he does an AEO pyro damage, then Garming's friend will keep cancelling Garming's skill cooldown, which will allow Garming to do constant pyro plunge attacks. Garming's resistance to interruption is also increased during his burst mode, and his burst lasts for 12 seconds while also having 60 energy cost. Overall, I would say that ever since 4.4 has been released, Garming is one of the most powerful 4-star damage dealers and also a really fun 4-star character to play. So if you like the type of characters that are fun or a really good damage dealing 4-star, you can get and build Garming. Yao Yao is a 4-star Dendro Spear user. By using her skill, Yao Yao will throw Yu-Gui on the field and then it will apply Dendro to nearby opponents or heal the active character, which also depends if they are below 70% health or above. Now her burst is just better version of her skill, and what Yao Yao will do, first will summon multiple Yu-Guis that will heal all of the party members, though it only lasts for 5 seconds and has 80 energy cost, and keep in mind to keep Yao Yao on field while her burst is active, since her burst ends if she goes off field before the 5-second duration ends. She will be also throwing radishes at the enemies if running or jumping while in her burst state. Now Yao Yao works great in teams that need a Dendro healer. She is kinda like an alternative 4-star Baiju, so if you don't have Baiju, then just use Yao Yao instead. Karara is a 4-star Dendro sword user. Now Karara is a Dendro shielder. Once the skill is pressed, she will do a quick Dendro damage at the opponents in front of her and then create a Dendro shield. Just like Thoma, she is another shield stacker, but instead of relying on her burst for shield stacking like with Thoma, for Karara, All you really rely on is her skill. First of all, the cooldown of her skill is 8 seconds, with a 12-second duration shield, so if the shield isn't destroyed and can use the skill ability again, pressing that E once again will give Karara a stronger shield, as the shield will obviously stack. Now, if you hold Karara's skill, well, she basically turns into this cat box that you can move around and is actually really fun and good for exploration, as it makes the climbing easier as well. What this box also does in the battle is that it marks the enemies with Dendro, and when it does, the shield becomes stronger by 20% more absorption for each marked enemy, and it can stack like that 3 times, meaning a maximum of 60% absorption can be gained this way. You can stay in this box form for the next 10 seconds, and depending for how long you use this ability, the cooldown of Karara's skill will be longer, ranging from 8 to 12 seconds, while her burst just makes her deal some Dendro explosions that really do quite a good amount of damage. This burst costs 60 energy. Overall, Karara can mainly fit pretty much into any team, because obviously she is a shielder, although the problem is that her shield stacking is a bit risky, since the shield can easily break before you can stack it, so there are better shielders out there, but if you still want to use Karara anyway, she can be used for exploration and in battle works best with the team that need a Dendro unit. Shikanoin Heizou is a 4-star Anemo catalyst. His skill has 4 stacks, and by charging to all 4 of those stacks, Shikanoin Heizou will obtain the declension effect, which does help Heizou, as it will increase his attack damage. It also increases party members' elemental mastery by 80 for 10 seconds after the skill hits the enemies, though keep in mind that his charging takes time and can be interrupted by enemies. His burst, which costs only 40 energy, is alright and basically just quickly throws enemies around, dealing fine damage, though at C2, his burst has better crowd control. If Heizou's burst hits enemies that are affected by Pyro, Cryo, Hydro or Electro, you will basically do an extra damage. Now, Heizou is a 4-star main DPS that does deal quite an impressive amount of Anemo damage for his rarity. In my opinion, he is pretty fun to use and is good especially in situations if you don't have any better main DPS. Other characters like Xingqiu/Yelan or Bennett could help him out and increase his Anemo damage. Layla is a 4-star cryo sword user. Layla's skill makes her create a very strong cryo shield, which creates 1 night star, as you can see on the shield, after every around 1 second, and once it reaches 4 of those night stars, well, they deal cryo damage to nearby opponents. However, there is also a shortcut, as when a party member uses his or her elemental skill, they create 2 more night stars, though the amount of night stars will be obviously cancelled when the shield expires or it is destroyed. The shield lasts for 12 seconds, with a 12-second cooldown, while her burst, which surprisingly only costs 40 energy, creates this massive cryo field that lasts for 12 seconds and constantly fires cryo damage into opponents, and every time it hits an opponent, 1 night star is gained once again. As Layla is one of the best shielders in the game, she can pretty much fit into any team. Like if you don't have Zhongli, you can just use Layla instead, though it's also the best if you have a Pyro character in your team, as they can deal melt damage with Layla. Faruzan is a 4-star Anemo bow user. Now, her entire kit is very familiar to Kujou Sara, so let me start by explaining Faruzan's skill. So, once the skill is pressed, Faruzan will quickly do this AoE Anemo damage, which will allow her to create this triangle once the charge shot is executed, which mainly groups the enemies towards its location. Now her burst, that has an energy cost of 80, will create this Anemo polyhedron that moves in a triangle position. This polyhedron will decrease enemies' Anemo resistance, while the party members will gain some Anemo damage bonus from it. This effect lasts for 12 seconds. Now finally off to constellations. Her C2 increases the duration of her burst by 6 seconds, which does help by quite a lot, while her C6 is just godly. First of all, Faruzan's burst increases Anemo party members' critical damage by 40%, and after every 3 seconds of party members dealing damage to opponents, they gain some energy, while also grouping the enemies in a way that they deal AEO Anemo damage after every 3 seconds. So as you can see, Faruzan is basically a broken support for Anemo damage dealers. C6 is a must-have, as it just makes her burst a lot more powerful and useful, despite having high energy cost, and once you got her to C6, use her with characters like Xiao or Wanderer and you will do an excellent job with Wanderer or Xiao. Chevreuse is a 4-star polearm user. She is the type who uses her shotgun as a weapon. By holding her skill, she will enter the aiming mode, which obviously you aim at the enemies you want to shoot. Once Chevreuse shoots at the aimed enemies, she deals AoE pyro damage, while also healing an active party member every 1 to 2 seconds in those 12 seconds based on Chevreuse's max HP. Also, once someone in the party setup creates an overload reaction, Chevreuse gains this overcharged ball, which just deals more pyro damage, while also buffing party members' attack that is once again based on Chevreus's HP. Also, each time party member in the party setup triggers an overload reaction, it will greatly decrease enemies' pyro and electro resistance. Now her burst just deals a quick AoE pyro damage, and that's basically it. I mean, it also creates those mines that deal extra damage. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Either way, Chevreuse is a super niche character that works exceptionally well in her own team, just like someone like Nilou, but unlike Nilou, who works in Bloom teams that only have Dendro and Hydro characters in the party setup, Chevreuse right here obviously works only in overloaded teams, while having only Pyro and Electro characters in the party setup. Now finally, our last character, who was the latest one to be released in the game. Chiori is a 5-star Geo sword user. Chiori's skill makes her dash towards enemies, dealing Geo damage, and by holding her skill, she will enter this aiming mode on where to dash, so Chiori is like Keqing or Alhaitham, but this time a Geo version. But the point of this skill is that it summons her doll Tamoto that will deal Geo damage to nearby opponents around every 3 seconds while lasting for 17 seconds. However, if a Geo construct like for example Zhongli pillar is placed nearby, then the second extra Tamoto will appear, just dealing extra Geo damage, while this Geo construct will also give Chiori a Geo damage bonus. Another thing is that if you press her skill twice in a row, then you will automatically be switched to another party member in your party setup. Also, after using her elemental skill and then normal attacking, then Chiori will gain a Geo infusion, meaning that she could also be used as a main DPS. But keep in mind that it lasts for a very short amount of time, and because of that it's better to use her as a sub DPS. Also, her C1 is pretty interesting, as you don't need to have a Geo construct placed for Chiori anymore, as she already gains that Geo infusion and additional Tamoto as long as just another Geo party member is in the party setup. Her burst just makes her deal a quick AoE Geo damage as she slices through the sheath. This burst costs 50 energy with around 13-second cooldown. So Chiori is now another Geo family member who works in Geo teams and is kinda like Albedo, but most importantly, pull for her if in need of a Geo sub DPS, and if you enjoy Geo team comps. Just make sure that you have someone who can place Geo construct in Chiori teams if don't have her first constellation, and build her on attack and defense, as this is what Chiori scales on. Now that I have finally managed to explain all of the characters in the game, here is my tier list as promised. Now remember that this is just my opinion, and you might think differently and say that this character should have been moved higher or that character should have been moved lower. We all have our opinions, so if you disagree with me then let me know, and please try to be respectful. Thank you. In the end, I believe that you can beat even the hardest content in the game playing even with the weakest characters, so honestly play whoever the hell you want and try not to be too affected by this rating, but of course you will struggle more by using the weak characters while flying through the hard content if using powerful if not meta characters. Anyway, I sincerely hope that this video helped you out. This video took a very long time to make. In fact, the longest time out of all of the videos I have done in my life, since I had to research all of the characters, going through each one of them carefully for explanations and ratings, so please show me some support. Either way, thanks a lot for watching this video, and I will see you all in my next one.